My guest today is Christopher Brookins. Chris is the co-founder of RociFi, a new DeFi primitive for zero and under-collateralized lending. Welcome back to the show, Chris.
Thank you for having me, Andy. It's a pleasure to be back here, my third time, I believe.
Yeah, I think it is your third time. It's been a little while though, and I can see, Chris, that you've been up to some stuff since we last talked. A lot has happened in the markets, certainly, but I guess just before we start to learn all about RociFi, which is your new endeavor, and how that all works, quite interesting actually. Before we do that, Chris, why don't you just remind the listeners, please reintroduce yourself.
Sure, no problem. So the last time I was on the podcast, it was working with my previous hedge fund, so Valley and Darrow Digital Assets. It was a quant-based crypto fund that specialized primarily in two machine learning-driven trading strategies. And before that, I was a credit analyst and portfolio manager for some of the larger commercial banks based here in the US within the corporate debt or commercial loan divisions. So at the beginning of 2021 now, years are just going by, that is whenever I made the transition ultimately to what began or stood or developed into RociFi.
Very, very nice, Chris. And well, let's learn about RociFi. And we can see, viewers will be able to see that it's on your T-shirt there. And you and I, we were just talking before we started recording, because I'll be frank with the listeners. I asked you, Chris, how do I say it? Because to my mind, it looks like RociFi, and I was like, oh man, Chris, this is a cool name, RociFi. But you corrected me. It is instead RociFi. So I guess where should we start? We need to give us just a really simple high-level explanation of what RociFi is. It's a DeFi primitive, and then we'll get the background to the name.
For sure. So I think you covered a decent bit of it. At the heart of it, what we are is an under-collateralized credit protocol that will be multi-chain, but we have launched recently on Polygon. That is our home. And essentially what it is it's DeFi or Web3 native lending, meaning users that come to Roci will not be required to KYC themselves or connect any off-chain data sources, whether that be KYC or bank accounts or anything like that. Essentially tackling the holy grail of DeFi is that anyone pseudo-anonymously can come and request a loan as long as they have a wallet address or addresses, and preferably some sort of Web3 presence, which can maybe be tagged or linked to a POAP, or maybe their social graph or an NFT collection. These are all things that they would voluntarily share. And if those are positive elements of reputation, but then also their historical on-chain behavior, they have the ability to take out an under-collateralized loan. So again, going back to this point of the holy grail of lending or credit, as it stands within DeFi. So the premise is that we don't necessarily care who these users or institutions are in the real world necessarily, meaning we don't require the legal recourse or any of that, but we do need to have an understanding who they are in on-chain or Web3 for us to be able to make a credit decision. And the core hypothesis around that is, do you think your on-chain reputation and history is going to be more valuable, is more valuable in 5 years? So is it valuable now? And do you think it'll be more valuable in 5 years' time? If you think so, then that is an element that users will look to build up, because this will ultimately be the new capital markets rails to where they can take out loans and save and all these different things. But also it helps sort of guide and incentivize that carrot to incentivize positive behavior. Because if you think this is going to continually eat more of TradFi's capital markets and access to capital, you don't want to burn your Web3 ID or a bunch of wallet addresses that have 500, 600 days of history on it just to have a quick gain. So some of these elements that we look to integrate whenever we do it. But yeah, quick,
All right.
short, and dirty.
I love it, Chris. There's a really clever and fascinating idea in there. So I think we'll circle back and we'll approach this from a few different angles as we go deeper into the show, I'm sure. But I also promised we'd hear the origin story for the name, Chris. So yeah,
I
fill us in.
I wish it was sexier if I'm being honest. So whenever we were looking to name the company, we knew that pop culture is a big thing within this particular space. You see it all over the place. So as we had mentioned or talked about on our last podcast many months ago, I'm a big fan of the show The Expanse. And I was likewise thinking like, oh, this is a super popular show. Everyone will get it straight from the jump. So let's name it Roci, shorten the name for the spaceship that the protagonists fly around in the show. And then finance was popular then. So let's just make it RociFi. Everyone will be able to instantly see, oh, Roci, got it. Show The Expanse, but it's done. Wasn't the case. I could count on one hand the amount of times that someone A actually said the name correctly, but B could instantly link the reference to it to the show. So it's been a very interesting experience. I guess it's a good thought query where people are like, where'd the name come from? How do I say it? But it did not go how I envisioned it in my mind at all whenever we were naming the company, but that is the short version of how Roci came to be.
I love it. And of course, regular listeners will know that we have a reasonably heavy sci-fi bent to the crypto conversation. And yes, Chris and I have discussed The Expanse before. And I must confess, Chris, I actually gave up on The Expanse. It's probably sacrilegious to say this, but I think I only got about 4 episodes into season 1. I'm sure it's people do say it's an incredible show. Should stick with it. Anyway, we're not really here to talk about The Expanse. Maybe we can you can tell me at the end of the show again how good The Expanse is. But I guess, Chris, one of the it's an interesting time to be a co-founder of a new DeFi platform or protocol, right? Because obviously, really the big story, the big story of this year has been the collapse of, I suppose, not DeFi, what you call more the CeFi platforms, most notably, of course, Celsius, but also the hedge fund Three Arrows Capital, and some of the other lending platforms. And I guess, how do you kind of think of this in terms of the context of starting something like this against the backdrop of a kind of a not so much a loss of a trust in DeFi? Maybe from the outside there is a little bit of that, but yeah, how do you think about this?
No, I think it's a great point. So there's a couple of ways that I can break it down. So first, to just be direct to the question, is it's a headwind for sure, because it has provided a little bit of distrust, but also left a little bit of a sour taste in people's mouths. But I think it's unfair because they're lumping what happened within CeFi into DeFi in general. And quite frankly, there's under-collateralized lending exists within DeFi, but it still kind of has that CeFi flavor to it, if I'm being entirely honest. True under-collateralized lending through the rails that people would say fit within the DeFi ethos, that didn't exist whenever everything. We are the first one that is actually doing that, and we only launched a little bit over 2 weeks ago. So it's completely unrelated to what is happening with Three Arrows Capital and then ultimately with Celsius. And I'm sure there'll be some other institutions or hedge funds that might have issues and blow up. So I think that sort of confusion is a headwind to the space, to the protocol in the short term, but ultimately it is sort of the fuel that will drive the space and drive ROCI in the long term, because it allows everyone to see the positive elements of DeFi whenever code is instituted. So seeing what happens with Aave and Compound, all these other loans being repaid ahead of time, but also allowing people to reshape their minds and thoughts around risk management. So what was happening, I can't speak for the specificity of Genesis and BlockFi, some of these other companies and their credit analysis programs, but it allows people to think, including institutionals and retail depositors, lenders, investors, that risk is very, very important. And you need to be able to understand credit analysis. And you need to be able to trust a protocol that has that experience, that shows its work, so to speak, and feel comfortable depositing in there. So I think this new focus on risk management is actually very, very positive for the space long term, but it's also very positive for us because that is literally what we do. We're bread and butter. So how I break it down and have broken it down several times is there's three core components that ROCI will key on that I think is necessary for successful DeFi under collateralized lending. And that is creditworthiness. You need to understand, does the borrower have the ability to actually repay the loan? Then there's trustworthiness. Does the borrower have the willingness to repay your loan? Is it linked to some sort of fraud account, phishing, hacks, whatever it may be, or some other gamesmanship? We'll create our own sort of category of fraud within our own platform as well. And then the third piece is reputation. Does the borrower have something to lose in the event of defaulting on this particular loan? So being firewalled from ROCI and potentially firewalled from all of DeFi as we move forward in the future and look at ourselves as more of a collective versus individual bands of rebels looking to sort of attack different things. So those three pieces are quite paramount. It all kind of goes back to what we have dubbed the Non-Fungible Credit Score, which is our NFCS. It's just an ERC-721 token, and that token packages and houses the user's addresses that they ultimately would like to be credit scored, which takes into consideration all those three pieces that I just articulated. And essentially, it will become DeFi and Web3's credential, like token credential of credit, reputation, and trust, which directly ties back into what Vitalik made popular this past month, even though ROCI's been working on this problem for over a year now, in regards to the Soulbound token notion. So in short, it's going to help us out tremendously in the long term. But in the short term, it requires a little bit of extra effort on our end to just educate around the difference.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's some really big ideas here, Chris, and I mean, it's really exciting because we talk about sci-fi, right? And the kind of ideas that you're talking about here, and Vitalik as well. These are sci-fi ideas, but they are really being built in the decentralized finance ecosystem at the moment. So I think, Chris, just because they are quite big ideas, it'd be good maybe if you just kind of, I know you did it kind of at the beginning of the show, but just walk us through it again, just in really simple terms. So I get the idea that, there's something called like a trustworthiness score, or a kind of, it's like a credit rating, but it's an on-chain credit rating. And then you talked about the on-chain reputation, right? So people build up this on-chain reputation, and you see that happening over the years, right? As they conduct whatever transactions they're conducting and build up, hopefully, a good reputation, and that will unlock, trustlessness transactions, I suppose, into the future. And then you talk about tying it to what you call, I think, the NFCS, the Non-Fungible Credit Score. So just really simply explain all that again, and then perhaps after that we'll come back to Vitalik's spellbound concept and what that is as well, because it's just fascinating, right?
For sure. So let's keep it super simple. So
Sure.
whenever a user will go to our site, roci.fi, if they want to have access to the app, they'll be prompted to mint their NFCS. So to actually be able to do anything outside of like to actually be able to borrow, you need to be able to mint your NFCS. You just need to connect your wallet address to deposit if you simply want to be a lender on the platform. But you'll go to the site, you'll click on mint your NFCS. You can connect or bundle as many addresses as you would like to, as long as they are all within the same seed phrase. And then you can mint your NFCS. So whenever you do that process, just think of it as kind of like a funnel. So at the top is the users, that's where they connect. And instantly at the top of that funnel, all those addresses are going to be ran through our fraud database. So some of it is open source, others elements of it we've built up through our own analytics to see, is this address associated with any bad activity previously? Again, as I mentioned, hacks, phishing scams, blah, blah, blah. If it passes through that, then the next piece that it goes to is this fraud score analytics. So what that is what is the probability that this address or addresses is in fact a fraudulent actor, but just has not been tagged as such yet out in the ecosystem. And that score is from 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest probability and 10 being the highest probability. That's where that trust piece comes in. And then if it passes that, then it goes to the next layer of the funnel, which is allowing the users to opt in sort of this reputational component, which is going to be a moving target because it's still a very new space. So we're still looking to like get as many reputation pieces connected to Roci on the front end so that we can gradually over time find out what actually like means something and what actually doesn't mean anything at all. So right now, CyberConnect is one of our social graph partners and just our protocol partners in general. They're great. And they are one of the primary pieces of information that users can connect that maybe will tag to their OpenSea accounts and all these different things. If you go to the CyberConnect page and you have a dashboard, you see all these different things, and Roci's icon is there as well. So the NFCS will now show on your profile page to where you can say, hey, I've got a great score reputation, but also if you default, it is right there on your profile page as well, which follows around your social graph. And then that's the reputation piece. And then the last piece is the actual credit scoring funnel, where it is the same exact scale, 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest credit risk, 10 being the highest credit risk. And based upon all of those pieces together, you end up with what your score is, the NFCS score, which is still on that same exact scale, 1 being the best score and 10 being the worst score. And the reasons why we break it down in that, outside of like those 3 components that I mentioned previously, is A, it's more holistic, but also B, I've been highly critical of the notion of reputation only lending. So we saw that previously in CeFi. Essentially, that's why all this shit hit the fan, is because everyone was just lending via reputation and not really much credit analysis was going on, if I'm being honest, from what I've been able to see on the outside looking in. Now, DeFi essentially came out with being essentially started with Vitalik's post of Soulbound, and then has since been piggybacked by protocols like Lens and some of these other ones, saying that we can use reputation based upon your social nodes and connections to issue all these different under-collateralized loans. That is true. That can be a component of under-collateralized lending, but that can't be the entire thing. So back to my point, the reason why we break it down in those buckets is just because someone is reputable and trustworthy doesn't mean that they should be levered up to the gills or even given an under-collateralized loan. Because the example I always used was, everyone knows someone in their life that they would trust their lives to, let them watch their kids or whatever it may be, but they don't pay their bills on time for whatever reason. So just because someone has all those great attributes doesn't mean they should be allowed an under-collateralized loan. Even more poignant now is the 3AC example. Just because someone's got a great reputation, that doesn't mean shit whenever they're insolvent. So it has to be a holistic system. And that is what we do. And that's why, again, it benefits us, everything that's going on in the market long term, because this is literally our bread and butter, but it requires us to educate more and poke holes in those differences, not just within the CeFi community, but also in the DeFi community as well. But we'll be able to do that, and ultimately people will see that. So yes, that is kind of the funnel, as you see, of that mints, that NFCS token whenever users come in, and that will be the token in which they engage with Roci throughout their life cycle. They won't need to remint that. It's one and done. So whenever they want to take out another loan, they just simply connect their NFCS again, and they're off to the races.
Yeah, very nice, Chris. Okay, well, tell us, what is the status of Roci at the moment? Like, how long has the protocol been live? What are the assets that are available for borrowing and lending, and what is the collateral taken, and what assets are supported at the moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are a little bit late in mid-July right now, and we've been live on Polygon for a little bit over 2 weeks at the moment. I haven't checked the numbers this morning, but last time I checked, we were over 6,000 NFCSs that have been minted on the platform to date.
Nice.
I don't know the borrow numbers. I think we've got maybe 50 unique borrowers on the platform as well. So things are moving along very, very well. The caveat to that is that the protocol we have imposed very strict capital limits at the beginning as a way to mitigate risk. So given we're doing something sci-fi, it can't be where we open it up and say, okay, come one, come all, let's get as much TVL in here as possible. That is not prudent for us, our reputation, but it's not prudent for the lenders as well, because there could be elevated defaults in this first iteration of lending cycle. And I always encourage people, or try to reshape people's thoughts, that defaults aren't a negative thing. They're actually positive, because that is how you get to the true essence of what works in under-collateralized lending and what doesn't. There's a lot of other like protocols and projects that are trying on-chain scoring, but are like wanting to do it from the sidelines. Like, we're actually in the arena, putting our money where our mouth is. Our capital is within these pools right alongside other lenders as well. So whenever they take losses, we take losses, but it is all done in a risk-adjusted manner, so that their ROI will still come out positive at the end of the day under a variety of assumptions. So I did calculations that even with 40% default rates in our pools, which is freaking astronomical, the ROI that lenders would receive with our current APR in our pools, which is approximately 12%, it will essentially equal the supply rate that they would get on other lending protocols. So there's zero opportunity cost here for them as well. So that is kind of the status of the protocol right now. Currently, we support USDC borrowing only. We support wrapped ETH collateral only, but we are quickly looking to expand that as well, to where USDC will be allowed as collateral, Matic will be allowed as collateral, and potentially being able to take out wrapped ETH and some of these other Polygon assets as loans as well. But again, everything has been done consciously as a way to mitigate risk at the beginning. And then as we pass some test bases, then we can gradually release the cap, so to speak, and let it be its own, self-fulfilling or growing thing.
Nice. And Chris, you said for the NFCS, the Non-Fungible Credit Score. So this is it's the ERC. It's like essentially like an NFT that uses Mint, right? So, and I think you said there are about 6,000 people have minted these so far.
Yeah, that's correct.
For this to really take off and just kind of achieve I don't know if escape velocity is the right turn of phrase here, but for this to really get major buy-in, I guess, from the wider crypto ecosystem, or DeFi anyway, what needs to happen?
So to get wider buy-in, I think we need to go through a few iterations of these loan repayments cycle. So right now, the duration on the loans, they're fixed rate as well, fixed duration, and they are 30-day loans. That's another element that is on the table for reconfiguring based upon user feedback. We're very user centric, but we need to go through a few of these cycles so that we can build confidence, but also trust in us as well. I think, again, from what you mentioned previously with CeFi, there's a little bit of a stain right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of retail users got burned by what happened with Terra. So we've definitely got some headwinds in the face, but ultimately the trust that we invoke by having skin in the game, our money where our mouth is, taking losses right alongside with lenders, but then seeing how those default rates drop and go down if we even have any defaults, and then how those lending rates far supersede what is out in the market, but it's directly traceable. It's not some newfangled tokenomic scheme where you're like, okay, well, how are we getting this 12%? It goes through there and does that. It's entirely straightforward. Building trust and building this the right way is how we ultimately get the buy-in of the greater ecosystem. And that includes having institutions, that includes having DAOs and retail investors borrowing from our protocol, because it's literally agnostic, plug and play. As long as you've got an address, you can borrow from Roci. That is how we get buy-in there. But then whenever we keep moving along, that is how we get continued buy-in from depositors from that same batch or that same group of individuals as well. And that ultimately starts that sort of reflexive feedback loop. So we just have to stay diligent, keep pushing forward, and ultimately the proof will be in the pudding, but that is how we get buy-in. And then once we do that, then it's a proven concept. So from there, it becomes a lot easier to cross the chasm, because everyone, I wish I had a nickel for every time I had a conversation. People were just saying this won't work and that won't work and da da da, which valid arguments, but like, let's take a chance. Let's be risk managed and risk thoughtful while we're doing this. But if we just sit here and say, well, that will never work. Well, yeah, it will never work. Someone actually has to step in the arena and try to take the hits to bring this into life. And we are the embodiment of that. So whenever we're able to do that, that will allow us, because it's a proven concept at that point, to cross the chasm, so to speak. And then it can be far more palatable and usable by retail. But then you can start seeing some of these really interesting use cases, whether it is, other people and geographics that maybe don't have the easiest access to traditional financial services, but maybe they have access to a smartphone and a Wi-Fi connection and are a little bit understanding of blockchain. That is a real powerful way to build up a credit history that will allow you to not only take credit, have a store value, but then also earn yield on your assets, all within your phone or within an internet connection, outside of the traditional financial markets. And that is ultimately where I think the true vision of Roci can get to. And that's whenever it becomes really, really interesting. And we start thinking about real world applications for some of what we're building within DeFi, which is kind of a contentious conversation right now.
Very much so, Chris. All right. Well, just as let's finish off this part of the podcast, and then we'll kind of do perhaps we'll do an abbreviated version of the very famous crypto conversation hot take round with you, Chris. I'm conscious of the, we've done it previously, but you're an interesting guy, and you've always got some hot takes. So I think we'll run through just some of what's going on in crypto with you. But just before we do that, talk us through some of your backers, Chris, for this. So I see you raised a seed round, 2.7 million, I think. Arrington Capital, Golden Tree Asset Management, Skynet Trading, LD Capital, Nexo Capital. Is that the Nexo that we are they okay? Just talk us through the what it was like to get the funding to kick this off, and what you think was your point of difference that made some of these guys think, well, this is worth a shot.
I would like to say it's my natural charisma and my magnetism, but it was it was. I'm extremely thankful for every single investor I have. They're carefully curated, based upon DeFi native, but having a little bit of flavor of TradFi, but are looking to make a bigger splash within crypto, CFi, having kind of their hands in and out, but ultimately still believing all in the ethos that I sort of laid out in our grand vision. So I think we put together a really good complementary band of investors. But if I can just be entirely frank, it was definitely an uphill battle. And I think that was in regards to whenever we were raising, DeFi wasn't sexy. So all the coins that were DeFi and publicly traded, they were in the dumps. And under collateralized lending was not sexy at all. So if I sound a bit contentious and bitter on Twitter periodically, which I'm trying to not be, it's because I am, because Vitalik does a post about Soulbound, and then, a few other freaking people hop on the bandwagon. They're like, this could be great about under collateralized lending. Have we thought about this? And we can do on-chain scoring. It's like, where the frick have you been for the past year and a half, whenever we were in the trenches, really trying to solve this problem from square one, and still coming up with similar elements that have the space is gravitated towards with Soulbound, but also better elements of risk management, which everyone still thinks that reputation is sort of like the bee's knees. So there was a constant push and pull of like sexiness, the NFTs and everything there, but ultimately that benefits us. So all of these little trials and tribulations benefit us because it allowed us to be very short, concise, succinct, find true believers from the investment side, not people that were just in it for the money or because it was the new sexy fad, but allow our team to focus in very narrow and get to market, but then also get there with a product that we think not only solves a burning problem for the space, but also does it in a risk managed way.
Wonderfully said, Chris. Okay, well, let's go to a very quick break, and then we'll come back, we'll finish off, we'll have some fun. We'll run you through a slightly modified version of the very famous Crypto Conversation Hot Take Round. Back in 1 second. And boom, we are back. And if you're watching on YouTube, well, we've been here all along, but I'm with Chris Brookins. Chris is the co-founder of RociFi. Not RociFi, as I thought, but RociFi, inspired by the big the protagonist ship in The Expanse. Anyway, it's a DeFi primitive for under-collateralized lending, as we've heard. But Chris, well, you are very well aware that I like to finish each podcast with a quick round of rapid-fire crypto conversation hot takes, but I still have to ask, are you up for it?
Of course.
All right, let's just run through, I guess, I just want to get your kind of quick hot takes on what's happening. Chris, I guess let's start with Ethereum. I guess perhaps one of the emerging narratives at the moment, well, or not even emerging, but the ETH merge, the ETH transition. How are you thinking about that?
I think so I started on the investment side. I'm no longer focused on the day-to-day price. So yep. I think that is getting a boost in prices, but ultimately the proof will be in the pudding. I think if they can successfully implement the merge, then it's only going to be positive, sort of a tailwind for that particular chain. And then all the other, or I should say the best of the ERC like L1 integration. So Polygon, maybe some other ones, I think will benefit in draft off of that movement. But if it can get done, of course, I think it's highly positive for the ecosystem, but then also potentially price as well.
Sure. And what about Bitcoin? You know, you're a DeFi guy these days, Chris. Yeah, do you still like Bitcoin as well? Bitcoin's still kind of part of the long term portfolio, even though, you know, there's, I don't know if there are kind of, you know, the anti-proof of work brigade that's always going to be potentially a headwind for Bitcoin.
No, of course. So Bitcoin is the original, and it's largest, and it's that for a reason. So I think you can look at that with all the same narratives that have probably been spoken about a million times on this show in the space, store of value, blah blah blah. I think it all still holds true, and it will continue to do so and continue to grow. In what particular time wave, who knows how long the tightening will last, which will be a headwind for Bitcoin in theory. But of course, I think long term, it's still incredibly strong. I think what others, like some people in the space have already spoken about, but I think is discounted greatly in some circles, is if you look at Bitcoin as replacing the gold market or the equivalent, but Ethereum has the capability to be the equivalent or replace capital markets or the financial system. What is larger on a market cap perspective? By far the financial system. So I think that will be, if Ethereum does eventually do the flippening and that happens, it will be because of those driving forces, which the merge will have a direct correlation with as well. But BTC will still do amazing.
Yeah, nicely said. And yeah, I mean, it's quite. Yeah, it was. I think the market was surprised even by kind of Ethereum's resurgence really over the last 3 days or so. But yeah, and I think, well, that's mainly because we have the merge coming up. Also, Chris, you know, we talked a little bit about Vitalik's concept of the soulbound NFT, if you like. Yeah, I mean, what are you an NFT guy yourself, and what do you kind of, obviously you are quite interested in this soulbound concept. So how do you see all this playing out? But yeah, are you an NFT guy yourself?
So like the traditional NFTs, pudgy penguins, blah blah blah, that sort of stuff. Quite frankly, I never kind of got it. It was never my thing. It's still not my thing. I don't see the allure of it outside of it just being like a flex on people, which that's really not my style. So for people who know, like I'm from Pittsburgh and in the US, and Pittsburgh, we're not really known for a lot of like the glitz and glam and shit like that. So it's not my style. Also, I'm a little bit older. I'm not a Gen Zer, so I never really got it. But I'm an NFT guy insofar as the NFCS, which is an NFT which I own and I think will be the next best thing since sliced bread, because it taps into the positive elements of what Vitalik was talking about in regards to soulbound. So something that is very unique to you. It's non-transferable, but it is a token or a credential, so to speak, that you can take and move in different places with Web3 and DeFi in this quote unquote metaverse that we're building. I think that concept is very positive, and we were building that long before Vitalik ever put pen to pad on that particular regard. But I'm biased. I think the NFCS of Roci is that grand vision of the soulbound, because it is immutable, it is only connected to that individual, and it does connect those elements of reputation, trust, but then also credit worthiness as well within one neatly packed ERC 721.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, let's start to finish off this, Chris. You know, you used to be a trader, a technical analyst, even. Look, I'm sure you still dabble. Obviously, you know, we're in the. Are we in the depths of the bear market? I guess we are. We have been. any thoughts on how you see this cycle playing out? Obviously, a lot of it is to do with the macro situation, which isn't super rosy. But yeah, just any quick thoughts on the markets.
So there's probably a lot more smarter and in tune people than I am at the moment. Quite frankly, I'm not sold on it, just because it was too soon, but also too many people were positive about it, I guess, in regards to sentiment. They're like, oh, hang in there and this shit and that shit. And it's like, it doesn't feel that we've gotten to the bottom where there's true capitulation. And the fact that people are kind of like pounding the table that BTC and Ethereum are up, 40% or 50%, whatever it is, down 80% from their all-time highs. Like, that's not typically what happens in bear markets. There's very few people that whenever the bear market bottom hits, where they enter with conviction, and typically they're sort of like, what is this person or institution talking about? So I think it gun to my head, and to be honest, I was a far better analyst and quant than I was a trader. So take this for whatever it's worth. I don't think that we fully expunged everything that is out there. There needs to be a true, like, oh shit, like, panic moment. And I think potentially a wick down to 10,000, 11,000, maybe that 12,000 mark, as I'm looking at the charts right now. I think that is something that freaks people out, because everyone on paper that was like, yeah, look at me, they see their gains go to zero if they bought right before it kind of took off. So even the most steadfast person is likely to call into question their investment hypothesis. But then the people that bought at the top and midway through, just selling out. So typically what I've seen historically is it needs to be like, what the hell is going on here? And that typically invokes a bear market bottom. I didn't feel that with the most recent plunge, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with you there, Chris. And perhaps the rally that we're seeing at the moment is, as much as it was a little bit of a surprise, not really, simply because June was just so dire, or the second quarter of the year was so bad. We're probably due some little relief. Relief rally. Whether it can continue, we're not sure. All right, well, the only way we can really finish this off, Chris, I think, is to return to the wonderful world of science fiction. And look, I'll just check in, and anything new on your radar? What have you been reading? What have you been watching? Or just The Expanse? What's going on?
So I do rewatch The Expanse from time to time. I'm that sort I'm that sort of guy. But there was I'm a classic Star Wars person, so was getting into Obi-Wan, that was on Disney Plus. I think there was another sci-fi one that was on Netflix. I'm blanking on the name of right now, but I'm still very much involved in that space. I'm looking for that next series that is going to sort of captivate me and take me down that rabbit hole of binge watching.
Well,
I don't think I, yeah, yeah.
Can I ask you then, Chris? Have you seen Raised by Wolves?
Yes, I love Raised by Wolves.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm kind of ashamed that I forgot that. I love Raised by Wolves. I was even after the season 2 season finale, it didn't feel like a season finale. So I'm like looking around, is there another episode coming? There should be another episode coming, but everything on the internet was saying that it was the season finale. But I'm very much into that particular show, and that kind of like shows where I'm at, where Google search and is there another episode coming? So I think that's probably the closest one that has captivated me similarly to The Expanse. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, me too. I've actually only seen the first season of Raised by Wolves, so I've still got season 2 to watch. But yeah, I think there was supposed to be a season 3, but for whatever reason, HBO cancelled it. Even just as, it was very much critically acclaimed show. And listeners, I mean, no spoilers, but it's really just the premise. It's really unusual premise, or I don't know if it's unusual, but it's basically 2 androids are sent to a mysterious planet, and the idea is they are going to start a new human colony, and of course things don't go to plan. But that is sci-fi.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So Westworld's back to, but I didn't know that they canceled the show, and now that's going to sort of like send me into at least a half a day of of searching the internet, thinking like, okay, are they going to try to get some signatures to revamp the show? Will another studio pick it back up? Kind of similarly what happened to The Expanse, because I'm sure it was expensive, no doubt. But I think it was worthwhile to see the story play through. And even in the most recent last season of The Expanse, they kind of, they cut it short with 6 episodes to bring it to conclusion, at least the first 6 books, which I thought was a little bit of a disservice to the viewers and the people that have been a part of the ride from the whole time. And I get it, it's budget, but like Bezos is, sending freaking rockets to space and doing all sorts of stupid shit. I think he can, pony up a little bit more dough so that this cult icon can sort of be concluded in the proper way. But I digress.
Shout out to Bezos. All right, let's close this out, Chris. Thank you for coming on the show. It is always good to catch up with you. Please tell the listeners where they can find you on Twitter, wherever else you like to hang out. And look, what they should do if they've been intrigued by what you guys are building at RociFi. Where should they go? What should they do?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter. It's at Crypto Brookins, no spaces, just one word. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. You punch in my name plus Roci, I'm sure I'll pop up quite quickly. For Roci, you can go to the main site, roci.fi, roci.fi. There you'll have access to a bunch of different information sources, but also that is the main point of entrance to the application. Like I said, just connect your wallets. We support MetaMask right now, and I believe also Ledger is the other one. So go there, you can connect your addresses and then mint your NFCS. I would encourage you to do that. But then also, if you go to our blog, which is roci.fi it is blog.roci.fi. There's tons and tons of information there, from everything from our rate strategy to our risk management, how we look at default risk, how we look at the NFCS, volatility, blah, blah, blah. There's a bunch of information there for the curious person. I would encourage you to go to our blog.roci.fi as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Chris. All the best, and bye for now.
Thank you for having me. I'll talk to you soon, all right?
All right, there you go. That was Chris Brookins. Man, I like Chris. Chris is a cool dude. It's always good to have him on the show. And yeah, RociFi, absolutely fascinating. Yeah, love the idea of tying in this kind of soulbound NFT token to build your on-chain reputation. It just makes sense. So yeah, great to see people like Chris starting to bring these ideas into the world. All right, that is today's show, folks. I think we'll leave it there. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the Crypto Conversation in whatever podcast app you are using. But for now, we're out of here. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave New Coin. See you.